In this video, we're going to learn how energy passes through ecosystems from the source, which is the sun, all the way through the food chain to the top carnivore. So where does all this energy come from? The sun is the source of energy for our ecosystems. The sun's energy is used by plants to make food through the process of photosynthesis, which we've discussed already. Plants then get eaten by herbivores, and then they get eaten by other consumers, and the energy passes along from link to link in each part of a food chain. So just to review food chains show the movement of the sun's energy from the producer to each consumer. And the arrows point to where the energy is going, not where it came from. So food chains always begin with a producer or a plant or some other plant-like organism that produces food through photosynthesis. And then that plant gets eaten by a primary consumer. So in this case, we have a butterfly. And then the primary consumer gets eaten by a secondary consumer, which in turn gets eaten by a tertiary consumer, also known as the top carnivore. Trophic levels can also be called feeding levels. So a trophic level is the level of a food chain where you find the organism. So in this case, the producer is the first trophic level. Then the herbivores or omnivores, so the primary consumer, is the second trophic level. The third trophic level would have omnivores or carnivores. And then the fourth trophic level, in this case, would also have an omnivore or a carnivore. Now, in ecosystems, it's not just simple food chains. Food chains actually interconnect to form food webs. So in some instances, one organism could be the second trophic level, or it could be the third or the fourth, depending on what it's eating. So if we look here, this is a whole mesh of food chains. So we have grass getting eaten by a rabbit, which gets eaten by a wolf. So that would be, in that case, there would be 3 trophic levels. In this case, we have a grasshopper eating some grass, and then a sparrow eats the grasshopper, and an owl eats the sparrow. So in that case, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 trophic levels. So you can see that they all interconnect. We don't just eat one thing. We eat a variety of different things. So we are parts of a variety of different food chains making a food web. So where does the energy go? So out of the 100% energy that enters a trophic level, only about 10% of that energy passes on to the next level, because we need to use some of that energy to survive. So to grow, for the energy to do the moving around and to just function, and for reproduction and so on. So only about 10% of the energy goes. So a pyramid of energy shows the available energy for each trophic level. So in this case, at the bottom, we have the producers. So they have a lot of energy, and you have a lot of producers. There are fewer primary consumers because there's less energy to pass on to them. Then there's fewer secondary consumers because there's less energy being passed on because only 10% goes on to each one. And then finally, there are very few top carnivores or tertiary consumers in this particular pyramid of energy. So just like energy passes through ecosystems and through food chains, pesticides can as well. So nutrients and energy are passing along, pesticides pass along too, but there are disastrous effects. So when an organism gets eaten, the pesticide gets eaten too, and it goes on to the next trophic level. So there's 2 different terms that we need to become familiar with. The first one is bioaccumulation, and that's when the pesticide builds up in the tissues of an organism. So I've represented the pesticide as this little green dot or circle. So we have a fish, and then the fish somehow eats something that has a pesticide. So now it has 3 little dots of pesticide, and then it eats something else that has pesticide, and now it has 5. And eventually, as time goes on, there's more and more pesticide building up in the tissues of the organism. So a lot of pesticides and toxins that have this type of effect, they get stored in the fatty tissues of the animal, and then they don't get broken down. They stay there forever and cause disastrous effects to the health of that organism. Biomagnification is when the pesticide increases in the concentration as it moves from one trophic level to the next. So when we learned about energy passing along, only about 10% passes on to each one. All the pesticide gets passed on. So if we had some plankton here that somehow got exposed to some pesticide, and this little fish eats the plankton, a whole bunch of them, those will all add up. So the shaded part here shows how much pesticide is in that fish. This fish will eat this fish and possibly some other fish, so then it's got more pesticide in it. And then this fish eats this fish and possibly other fish, so there's more pesticide in its tissues. And then eventually the top carnivore has way too much pesticide because it's eaten way too much fish that were exposed to the pesticide that had eaten the fish that was exposed, and so on. So some examples of some pesticides and toxins that can build up in tissues would be PCBs, and then DDT, which was a pesticide that's now banned in North America because it does cause disastrous effects to the health of ecosystems.